Morning, this is Dan.
There, record. Okay, now we're recording. Sorry about that, Rich. Very good.
No problem. So good morning again, everyone. My name is Rich Chester. I work as the Director of the Business Intelligence Practice at LPA Software Solutions. I've been working with Chromalox off and on for multiple years as a partner working with you guys on your COGNOS environment. And it's my pleasure to be with you today to go through what is actually two classes. The first is an introduction to this new COGNOS Analytics portal here called the Welcome Portal. And that's going to be followed by a report authoring class. So over the next 3 days, we're going to first learn how to navigate through this portal, which hopefully you all have open via the link that was sent to you. And once we've gotten used to the portal, we'll switch over to the report authoring class and learn how to create reports using the tool. Ideally, you will have received two PDFs. The first PDF, called CA Navigating COGNOS Analytics, is the one we're starting with. And then after that, we will switch over to the CA Report Authoring Chromalox PDF if you are a follow along in the book kind of student. Those are good reference books. They were written for a version of COGNOS Analytics 11.0.12. Now you happen to be currently on version 11.0.4, which means that in the books there'll be slight differences because, as you can imagine, IBM has been tweaking the product with each release from 11.0.4 up through and including 11.0.12. So if there are differences in the book, I'll point them out. And when you guys do upgrade, because I know you will be upgrading to the latest and greatest version, then your books will exactly match. But until then, there will be some slight differences. Please don't let that throw you. I'll point out when those differences occur. So if you do have that CA Navigating document, you might want to skip forward past all of the starting slides to page number 6, which is the page that shows an image of this screen. It looks slightly different, but identifies all of the component parts, and that's where we'll start. Is everybody logged into the portal at this point? I don't want to leave anybody struggling.
Yes.
All right, very good. We are recording, so I'm going to try to sound very smart and clever. Why don't we get started? So this screen is broken up into 3 major components. The largest component, this center portion of your screen, is known as the canvas. So at the moment, it simply says, welcome to IBM COGNOS Analytics. And in this version, that really won't change. In subsequent versions, you'll see in the book on page 6 that the screen is enhanced. And what you'll see in here are some blocks that represent all of the reports and dashboards you've used. We call that your recently used list. There's actually 2 places you get that in the current version. In the version you guys happen to be running, you'll get that over here. So it's not like you don't get the recent list, it's just not on your welcome screen. So that's why the screen looks a little different in your book versus on the screen here. But still, the 3 parts, this canvas part, when you run a report, it will appear in your canvas. When you create a new report, you'll be doing that in your canvas. When you run or create a dashboard, all the action happens in the canvas. On the left side of the screen, you'll find the navigation bar. Now, the navigation bar is called that because of these top 4 items here on the top left. Search, My Content, Team Content, and Recent. Now, on your screen, this gray bar may be quite narrow. It may not look exactly like my screen, and that's normal. It depends on the size of your screen and how you have your PC set up in terms of your screen density. If COGNOS believes your screen is large enough to display both the icons and the words, it will go ahead and do so. But you'll notice in a bit when we run a report, this will narrow. Even so, for some of you, though, this might already be narrow. It may just show the icons. But that's okay. If you don't know what the icons are yet, which you probably do not, if you hover your mouse over the icon, it should give you a screen hint that shows you the name, what the icon stands for. But regardless of whether you can see the words or not, the icons are listed as Search, Team Content, My Content, and Recent. Oops, I got those out of order. Search, My Content, Team Content, and Recent. These are the navigation options. That's why this is called the navigation bar. Was there a question? No? Okay, good. And the reason that we call these the navigation buttons is because this is how I get to navigate to my reports or my dashboards that I want to run. And so there's 4 ways to get there. One is to search for them. You put in a phrase, it finds matching objects, and then you can select one of the objects from the result of the search. If you're a COGNOS 10 user, if you've used the previous version of COGNOS, then you would know what is now called My Content as My Folders. So if you happen to have used COGNOS 10 in the past, you're probably used to the terms My Folders and Public Folders. Starting with COGNOS 11, IBM renamed those to My Content and Team Content. Now, if you've never used an older version of COGNOS, that's fine. There's nothing required about that. But then these are just new terms to you. My Content is your private area for storing things, storing reports you have written, storing dashboards you have written. It's private to you, however. That means that if you create a report and store it in My Content, you cannot share that report with others. In other words, you can't send a link to somebody and have them click that link and run it, because when they log in, they have their own private My Content that's private to them, and your My Content cannot be accessed by them. So My Content, private to you. Team Content, shared things, shared reports, shared dashboards, shared packages. So if it needs to be shared with multiple people, it has to be stored in Team Content. If it's private to you, if it's something that you've written for yourself that only you are going to use, you would put it in My Content. Also, if you're creating something new that will ultimately be shared, you would normally create it first in My Content, get it perfect, get it tested, have it ready, and then you would work with your COGNOS administrator often to copy it from your My Content to a place in Team Content so you can share it. Team Content, this shared area, is usually very managed. In many cases, it'll be very few people who have the power to update the items that are in Team Content. Your My Content, on the other hand, is 100% controlled and owned by you. You can always save things to My Content. You can always modify the things that are in your My Content. And then to move things to be shared in Team Content is usually an administrator task. That's not 100% true everywhere, but that's how most organizations have organized Team Content. They make it a highly controlled area. And then finally, you have your Recent button. And this is going to show you the last 20 items that you have used, whether they're the items you have written, like a brand new report, whether it's a report that you have run. The COGNOS tool automatically maintains the list of the last 20 items you have touched in some way, reports and dashboards by and large. And the idea here is if you used the report yesterday, chances are good you're going to want to use it today. So this is sort of a quick way to access that same object. So regardless of how you navigate to an object with one of these 4 items, your choices at that point are to run it or to edit it. That's in general. So that's the top left of the navigation bar. The bottom left has a number of options. Now, I'm an administrator, having logged in, and therefore I see all of the options. You guys are probably not administrators having logged in, so you may not have this manage entry at the bottom. Manage is for the administrator to monitor and tune the system. So if you don't have a manage button, then that's not abnormal. So, but you should have, in all likelihood, a new button, an upload files button, and a notifications button. Is there anyone that doesn't have a new button? Okay. And if you click on the new button, just to check this out, is there anyone on the phone who doesn't have the word report listed as one of the new things you could create? Great. Because if you couldn't create new reports, the second class we're going to do would not be doable. So that's good. All right, well, now that we've got this menu open with new, the easiest way to close that menu is going to be to click new again. You could also, by the by, click somewhere blank on the screen. So I clicked above where new is. That would also close it. So that's the navigation bar. I navigate to existing content, or I create new content. One of the things in COGNOS 11 that is unique to this version is this notion of uploading files for analysis. You may or may not have access to the upload files tool. It's something that your administrator controls. But if you've been given access to upload files, the idea here is that you can upload simple spreadsheets, one tab. If you have multiple tabs in the spreadsheet, it'll only pay attention to the first tab. Very simple format. The first row is your column names. All of the rest of the rows are your data. And the idea with upload files is that you could analyze the content of your file in a dashboard right after you upload. Or you can take that uploaded file and through something called a data module, which we will not teach this today, but we will touch on from a concept perspective, using this thing called a data module, you could combine that spreadsheet with some of your corporate data and describe how the spreadsheet data relates to your corporate data in that data module tool. And then you could write a report or a dashboard combining the data from your spreadsheet and your corporate data asset. So a lot of power baked into COGNOS 11, in terms of personal data in a spreadsheet that you can upload and immediately analyze, or using this data module tool to relate that uploaded spreadsheet to your corporate data, and then leverage both your personal data and your corporate data together in a report or a dashboard. We'll come back to notifications in a moment. So that's the navigation bar. Either I navigate to create new, or I navigate to existing on the nav bar. The last bar at the top is called the application toolbar, or sometimes just called the application bar. The left-hand side is just an icon and a name. There's nothing interesting right now, but you'll notice that the application bar changes depending on what you're doing. When you're running a report, you'll get some icons on the left-hand side. When you're creating a report, you'll get some different icons, and so on. So the application bar will change. On the left-hand side right now on this home welcome screen, it doesn't have anything interesting to look at yet. In the middle, there is a button. You can click it. It says welcome right now, and when you click it, it'll just pop out welcome. But this button is known as the switcher. And you'll see why it's called the switcher in a moment. We're going to run a report, and then we'll see what the switcher does in action. But in general, the switcher allows me to move between the things I have open. In other words, I switch from one open thing in my canvas to another thing to show in my canvas. So the switcher lets me switch between items I have open. So I pick which one is showing in my canvas at any given time. So we'll see that working in a moment. If we scooch over to the right-hand side of the application bar, you'll notice a few buttons there as well. The first button is this ... button. Anytime you see a ... in the interface, that's known as a More button. Now, this More button right now, not particularly interesting. If you click it, it's just going to have a Set as Home option, which says, set the view in my canvas as my home, but this already is your home. So we'll come back to Set as Home in a moment, and there will be other things under More depending on what you're doing. When you're running a report, there's different things under More than when you're writing a report, for example. So again, context sensitive. The next item over it represents you, and this is known as your personal menu. If you click it, you'll see you have a number of options here. We'll come back to some of these options in a moment. Right now, I just want to get you through the full interface and just point out that the last button is your Help button. And so that's the application bar here. The application bar will change, like I said, depending on what we're doing, whether we're running a report, whether we're writing a report, and so on. And so for that matter, will the navigation bar in the top left. The bottom left of the navigation bar in general doesn't change. That's sort of a static list of options. And of course, your canvas changes to show whatever it is you have open, and your switcher is how you switch between open things. So that's the names of all the stuff. Why don't we go ahead and give some of these functions a try. So I went through a lot of information that's in your book, and I didn't necessarily tell you what page contained what information. And you should consider this book as much as a reference guide as it is any kind of a exercise guide. You'll find that the reporting book that we'll switch to after this portion of the class is one that has specific exercises and step-by-step instructions. And so I'm going to try to be very conscious of telling you what page we're on. But if you look through your book on page 11, for example, it describes the search, the My Content, the Team Content, and the Recent. Through page 13. On 14, it talks about New, where I click it to create new content. It tells you about Manage. On page 15, it describes the application bar. It tells you about the More button. You'll notice, again, that the book and your screen are slightly different. On your screen, Notifications is in the bottom left, but in the book, it describes it as the top right. That's because IBM moved it. In 11.04, it was on the bottom left. When you upgrade to a more recent release, you'll see that your Notifications button moves to the top right. It does the same thing. It's just that it's moved to a different location. And Help is described on page 18. And on page 19, it explains these kind of greenish-blue circles. So you'll notice you've got these greenish-blue circles in a number of places. And what these are called are coach marks, or hints, if you will. I'm going to click on the hint that's next to Team Content. And when I click on it, you'll notice that it will pop up a balloon with some interesting information about, in this case, the top left section, the navigation section. And it gives you just a quick idea of what that section is for. And you'll notice that there's a black X in the corner, and then at the bottom there's a blue link called Turn Off Hints. Let me explain. If you wish to retain the hints on your screen and use them in future, you don't want to click either the black X or the Turn Off Hints link to close the hint. You just want to click somewhere blank. On the other hand, if you've got a hint open, you've read it, you get it, you don't believe you'll need to see that particular hint again, you can click the black X. And that will delete that hint bubble from your screen, but it'll keep all of the other bubbles around. And finally, if you have read the hint and perhaps you've read all of the hints and you feel you no longer need access to them, you can click on the Turn Off Hints link. And you'll note if you do that, all of those coach marks will go away. Now, sometimes you'll have done that, and you'll wish that you hadn't. It's okay. You can turn them back on. To turn them back on, and you can go ahead and do this with me if you wish, go up to the top right of your screen where your name should be displayed next to a little man with no hair. If you click up in that area, which is your personal menu, is what that's known as, you'll find in there an entry called My Preferences. Go ahead and click on My Preferences. When you do that, one of the items that is currently unchecked for me because I turned off my hints, show hints. If you want them to come back, all you need to do is click the checkbox, and those hints will come back. Personally, having used the system for the last couple of years, I don't find I need these hints anymore. As you guys are new to this environment, you might find having access to that coaching desirable. You can set it whichever way you wish. While we have the preferences open, guys, let me just tell you a couple other preferences that you're probably going to change. The first preference is report format. And I say probably going to change. Let me rephrase that to say that if you are going to change the default format your reports run in, this is what you would change. You don't have to change it. So I sort of implied you had to. You don't have to. This default report format, though, is an important one. Let me have you click where the default format is set. Mine is currently set to Excel. Yours might be set to something else. If you click into that, you'll see the list of options that are available to you there. These are the report formats that you can output reports to. HTML is essentially display my report as a web page, display it in my canvas as a web page. And that's actually not a bad format, even though it's not portable as much as a CSV or an Excel is, right? Because that's going to give you a file that you could attach to an email and share, that kind of thing. HTML is display it here on my screen. But sometimes we write reports to be interactive. And HTML is the interactive format that lets you interact with the report while it's being displayed. Whereas PDF and Excel are more static copies of your data, formatted, but static. CSV, I think you guys know what a comma-separated values output is, but if you don't, it's an output format that takes your data from your report and makes it easy to import that data into another software program. Excel data is probably new to most of you. Excel data is a special format that only works with certain types of reports. It only works with reports, as you'll learn in our second class, that consist of a list object only. Reports could be made up of lists, crosstabs, and visualizations, but Excel data won't work with a visualization report or a crosstab report. It will only work with a list report. So as a default format, it may not be a good choice. But Excel data has a unique capability, and that is it's a native Excel output that is very much like a CSV. In other words, it will create a tab of data in an Excel spreadsheet that is very easy to analyze in Excel. Many times we run reports with the intention of downloading them and then doing more analysis in Excel. So the Excel output is going to give me a formatted Excel spreadsheet. Not to say you can't use it for analysis, but depending on how the report was written, you might find that there are merged cells where a value spans 5 rows, but the value is listed only once, and the cell for that value is merged over those 5 rows. Not very easy to analyze with that spreadsheet. You would actually have to unmerge the rows and copy those values into all 5 Excel data for the same report, however, would automatically reduplicate the values and unmerge the cells for you. So when you run a report whose output you know you want to analyze in Excel, you might choose to run it in Excel data. But because it's not a format that works with every single report you might run, as a default format, I don't recommend it. Instead, I would recommend one of the others, HTML, PDF, and Excel being the most common default formats. There's no specific reason to change your default format right now unless you want to have your screen and my screen exactly match. But I am going to change my default format to HTML for the duration of the class. You know, I'm going to strongly recommend you do so as well, knowing you can change it to something that makes more sense from a production use perspective after class. Any questions about that? All right, great. Now, there's no OK button or anything like that to save your preferences. Once you have saved the preference, the change that you want, you just click somewhere blank on your screen, and it will close the Preferences panel. So the preferences are, if you will, auto-saved. On page 20 of your manual, using Smart Search, it gives us an example to just see how this search works. Now, IBM calls it Smart Search because the search term you entered isn't simply just a look at the names of reports and find matches. It goes further than that. Let's type in a search. You can type in probably any search you want, but if you'd like your results to match mine, I'm going to suggest you type in the word sales. Now, as soon as you type it in, you see straight away COGNOS is presenting you with options of what you might be looking for. Now, you can leverage one of these options if you think that there's a good match there as your search term, or you can just hit enter to run your search without selecting any of those items. And now you're going to get a result list. And this list will include some obvious matches, you know, where the word sales is in the title. But then you might actually find, if you scroll down, that you find entries where sales is not in the title, like Gen H in my list. That doesn't have the word sales in it at all. However, you can tell by the icon here, and by the way, if you to learn the icons, you can put your mouse over them, and they'll pop up what they are. The Gen H is a folder, so somewhere in this folder are items that match the word sales. So you see this search, this Smart Search, goes beyond a simple look at the name. It looks within the object. So, you know, I might have a report called, you know, Rich's Results, and in it, there might be a column called Sales Total. It would come up in this search for sales because of that column being in the report, even though the name did not say the word sales. So that's why it's a quote-unquote smart search. Again, the icons tell you what sort of object you have, and keep in mind that the search is only going to return the items you have access to that match. So again, as an administrator, I have access to everything in the system. Because you guys are probably not administrators, your search results may not exactly match mine. And that's all due to the security that's in place that we're all, that you guys are all subject to. It should only show you objects you have access to. And if my list is bigger, it's because I happen to have access to everything in the team content. You'll notice below each item is the path to that item. And by the way, that path is clickable. So at the top of mine, I have sales by customer order date Excel. And below it, I have team content sales, looks like our vice reports inquiries. It's too small for me to see. However, if you put your mouse over that path, you see it's clickable. Pick any path that in your result set. It doesn't have to be on this particular item. Just click on that path, please. And what you'll see is that it will fly out a new panel, and on that panel will be the contents of the folder in which this report is stored. So even though it was sales by customer order date Excel, I can actually see the contents of the entire folder that report lives in. Now, why is that useful? Well, it's useful because maybe this is not exactly what I was searching for, but we tend to put related reports in the same folder. So if I get to the folder, chances are the one I was looking for will be there. So that's the theory. So I could, of course, just click on the report to run it if I wish, or I could click on the folder as I saw, and then I could run any report in the folder by clicking on it. If you hover over a result in your search, you might notice that a button appears with 3 dots. That's one of these More buttons. If you click on that More button, you're going to get a context menu. And by the way, when you're navigating like this in search, if you right-click on an item, you'll get the same context menu as the More button. Now, the More button always works. Everywhere in the interface, if you click on More, you get the context menu. The right-click may not, depending on the part of the environment you're in. So, More button will always work. Right-click sometimes works. I tend to be a right-clicker, so I try to right-click everywhere. And if it doesn't work, I know I have to use More in that case. And notice the options I have: Run As, Edit Report, View Versions, and Properties. We'll come back to those. For now, I want you to go ahead and click on your canvas and close your search results. Now, you might have noticed on the search screen that there was a funnel button and a save button, and that's because you could save this search if you wanted to run this search over many days, right? This is a search you do a lot. You could save your search term and then just click on the search term each time instead of entering it. The funnel allows you to say, hey, only search reports for this term, or only search dashboards for this term. So it lets you narrow your search. Questions about searching? Okay. Go ahead and click on My Content, please. That's the next button down. Now, your My Content may be empty, and that would be fine. You'll just get an empty list. I am logged into Dan's system right now, and so I'm seeing Dan's list of objects that are private to him. And so these are all of the objects that Dan has created. Yours may be empty because this is the first time you've logged in. That's okay. By the time we finish class on Thursday, you'll have several items that you have stored in your My Content. Again, you've got icons that tell you what sort of thing it is. If you hover your mouse over an icon, it tells you what it is. Go ahead and click on Team Content, please. So in Team Content, you should see a list of folders. Again, I have access to all of the folders in the system. You may only have a subset of the items that I have. If you would, please, let's navigate a bit. So ideally, all of you have a folder called Packages, yes? Please click on the word Packages, and you'll get a second flyout. And that will show you, first of all, a new icon. That icon is the icon for a package. And then, again, you may not have access to all of the packages that I have, but I believe most of us, if not all of us, should have access to global sales, or at least one of the sales objects. I'm going to click on the words global sales. You can click on any of the words on any package you have, just to show you that you get a a third flyout panel. So as you navigate through folder structures in team content or in my content, you will get a maximum of 3 panels. Once, if you had a folder in the third panel, when you click on that folder in the third panel, the first panel will collapse and you'll get a new third panel, which is the contents of that folder. Let me see if I can illustrate that. So at this point, let me click around a little bit, and you guys just kind of hang tight for a second. I'm going to try this engineering folder, and then I'll do engineering metrics, and hopefully there's a folder. Hey! And then, so this is 3 panels out. Now I'll click on a 4th folder. So you see my first panel collapsed, and I have a new 3rd panel showing me the contents of that folder. So this, and again, this might have another folder in it, this 3rd panel, right? And I could keep clicking folders, but I'll only ever get 3 panels. And all of the other panels leading up to the contents of my 3rd will be under this less than symbol, which is my go back 1 folder button. It's the go back to my collapsed panels is what that does. Let's go back to my collapsed panels. Okay, so this navigation is this navigation, this is unique to this version of the system. Actually, this navigation I'm showing you, you need to know because you're going to be using it for now. But when you upgrade, this navigation will not be what you'll use in team content. So instead, let me show you the navigation you will get after you upgrade. You'll only get one of the 2 styles. Right now you have 2 styles of navigation you can use. IBM took this default style away. In whatever screen you're on, which could be down in that sales package that we were before, or in the packages folder, and then in the global sales folder, whichever one that is, in the top right of the panel that's open, the last panel, there's a button called Switch Views. Go ahead and click on that Switch Views button. And you'll switch to what is known as the wide view for navigating. And this, guys, when you upgrade, this will be the only view you have, is this wide view. Now to click around in this view, you at the top have what I call breadcrumbs that show you the path to the folder you're seeing. So the path for me is I was in team content and I clicked on sales, and this is the contents of the sales folder. Now, you never use your browser buttons to go forward and backward in COGNOS. You always use these breadcrumbs. So if I wanted to get back to the top of team content, which you guys should do as well, you just click here on this breadcrumb on team content. And now that will take you back to the top of the team content folder and show you all of the folders and team content that you have access to. And then again, I'm going to click on packages. And you see it doesn't open a new panel. It merely reuses the same panel. And it shows you your path. So this, when you upgrade, will be the navigation style that you get. Until you upgrade, though, the default navigation is going to be this multi-panel navigation that we looked at originally. So that's how you leverage the team content and the my content. Now, if you click on recent, chances are there will be nothing there for you because you have not recently viewed anything. However, once we start running reports, and we're going to run a report in a second, we're just going to have to kind of figure out what reports you guys have access to because I don't know what your security is. So it'll be interesting. We're all going to run our own report and have slightly different result. One of the things I'll need to chat with Dan about is that I don't see that the samples that we need to use for our training are installed. but I'm gonna look around for them for a second here. So again, if you could just take a moment, there should be IBM samples installed that we need for the training that we're doing. So that'll have to get installed between now and Wednesday's class. So at this point, to run a report, can you guys tell me, do you have access to the sales folder on the top of team content?
Yes.
Okay. Can you click on that sales folder? And let's click on the folder called, I don't know, billing. Does everybody have the billing folder?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. If you click on that, you'll get a third panel. Now, there's a couple of reports in this folder here. You can tell by the icons. I'm going to try sales by product code. So if you would, please click on sales by product code to run it. Oops, looks like I'm not allowed to run it. You guys get the same error?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's what happens when you poke around and try things. So I'm going to guess that this error message is because something was deleted from the portal. Go ahead, click OK to close that out of your work area, and then click back on Team Content. You'll notice that it remembered where we were in Team Content. So again, we're kind of poking around in the dark a little bit to see what works and what doesn't. Why don't we try Standard Margin Reports folder? That'll collapse my first panel, and there's two reports, standard margins and standard margins by market channel. And in the first one, notice if you hover over, it gives you the full name. In this version, you can't change the size of the panels. They did add that in a later version, but not in this version. I'm going to click on this top report and see if we can get a report to run. Nope, those reports don't appear to be working either. Well, I'm so glad we're recording these false starts. I'm going to go back to the billing panel, and I'm going to try Rep Sales Report folder. And I'm just going to try this top entry called Commissions by Company and see if anything there works. If this doesn't work, then we're going to need to try another folder. But this does appear to be running. Now, you'll notice that when you clicked on the name of the report, the report began to run within your canvas. You'll notice that your switcher button at the top now contains the name of this report. And this report did run for me. Hopefully it ran for you as well. You'll notice you've got a horizontal scroll bar where you can scroll across. This happens to be a crosstab report. Notice if you did change to HTML, then your screen looks like mine. If you didn't change your default format to HTML, you might have a PDF open, or you might have actually been prompted to open an Excel. Either way, we're going to get the same data. It's just a matter of format. If you did switch to HTML like me, you'll notice in the bottom left of your screen are some page navigation buttons. I'm going to click page down to move down one page. And you see now I have top and page up available to me. And so when you're running in HTML and you have multiple pages of output, in the bottom left here, you have these navigation buttons. Okay? Now, your switcher, if you click on the switcher, remember that's the middle of your application toolbar. If you click on your switcher, it will show you two things. Oops. Looks like I have lost access to my screen. So I'm not sure who is monitoring what's happening on the PC that I have control of, but if someone could help me out here, it looks like, oh, no, it looks like I'm good now. So if you click on your switcher, you'll notice all of the things that I have open. I have sales by product code open, sales by margin open. I have this commission report open, and I have my welcome open. So even though, you know, these two guys broke, I didn't close the screens on them. I just went back to team content. So they stayed open, which is good because I can really show you how this switcher works. You see how I am just clicking on different entries in my switcher and moving my canvas to show each one that I'm interested in. So you see, I can have as many things open as I wish in the portal, but only one of them can appear at a time in my canvas. The switcher lets me pick which one is being shown in my canvas at any given time. So that's part one of the switcher's job. Part two of the switcher's job is to allow me to close an open item. So let's, you know, I'm going to close sales by product code because it failed when I ran it. You notice this minus sign button and a circle here? That's called your remove button. So the terminology would be you would remove sales by product code from your switcher by clicking the remove button. And actually, I want you to go ahead and remove everything. That'll close all of the open items. You can't close your home view, your welcome view. Notice it's got a little house there rather than a remove button. But you use the switcher to display your open things in your canvas. And when you're done with those open things, you use your switcher to close or remove them. Now, if you had made changes to an item, when you go to remove it from your switcher, you will get a pop-up that tells you you have unsaved changes, which is your one and only opportunity to save those changes, or you will lose them if you proceed from that warning, okay? So that's how the switcher works. So in your book, we have covered pages 24, 25, we did 26, 27, so we did a lot. 28, we clicked on the more. On page 28 in your book, you see that the context menu is different in the book. That's because they added more things to the context menu in later releases, that's all. Page 29 is our next thing. So we clicked on the report, we ran it right now, we waited for it to run, and it displayed right on our screen. And it ran in our default format. Well, what if I want to run this report, but not in our default format? What if I wanted to run this report in a different format than my default, let's say a PDF? Or what if I wanted to have it run, but maybe this is a report that takes a good long time, and I don't want it to tie up my canvas while it's running. I want it to just run in the background. I can do that as well. So let me show you how you do that. If you click on Team Content, guys, and we'll get back to, again, it remembers where you were in Team Content, which is kind of nice. If we logged off and logged back in, it wouldn't remember this. It would start us fresh at the top of Team Content. But while we stay logged into the session, it does remember where we've navigated to. I'm going to hover, not click, but hover over the report we just ran, that commission report, and bring up my More button and click it. Or you could just right-click on that report. Either way, you'll get this same context menu. Notice here, this is if I wanted to change this report, this is how I could edit the report. I would use this context menu and choose Edit Report. If I wanted to copy this report or delete this report, you may not have delete because you may not have access to do that with this report. You may not be able to delete it. You may not even have Edit Report, although I bet you do. That's all controlled by security. The one I want you to click on, please, is Run As. So run as says I would like to run this different than the default. So when the run as opens, what you're showing are what are known as the basic options. And the basic options are really going to default to your preferred format from your preferences. So I changed my preference to prefer HTML. And so that's why it's pre-selected. But you notice I can pick any format here. Now, notice I can pick exactly one format at the moment. I can't run in the basic options in multiple formats at the same time, only one. Number two, notice Excel data is here. Now, I mentioned earlier, but it's worth mentioning now, that Excel data will only succeed if the report you're running consists of a list type output. This commissions report that we just ran is actually a crosstab type output. And if we were to choose Excel data to run this in, it will fail. We'll get an error because it's not a compatible format for that output. Excel, PDF, those will work. Excel data will not. I'm going to go ahead and choose PDF here and click Run on the bottom, the Run button. And what that should do is run that same report, but it will run it to a PDF and then display the PDF for me. Now, this might take a little bit of time. It might be really fast. It all depends on the report. But there's my PDF output for this report. Notice it's in my Canvas, my work area. Depending on how you're set up, it might prompt you to download the PDF, or it might display it in your work area. That's all a browser setting. It should also, if you hover in the PDF, and I always struggle to find it, there it is, that's where you'll find a Save button that will let you save this PDF to disk on your PC. You can go ahead to your switcher and remove this report, and then please go back to Team Content so that we can look at another Run As option. So again, on this commissions report, right-click and choose Run As. But now notice the Run in Background switch, which is currently turned off, which is why we have the basic options. I want you to click over on the switch. That will slide it over and enable it. And you'll notice that now I can run in multiple formats at the same time. And you see there's an advanced entry that I want you to click on, which will expand advanced. So Run As in the basic options says run the report right now, tie up a panel in my switcher while it runs, and run it in exactly one format, whichever format that I pick. When I go to enable Run in Background, I now have the option to select multiple formats. It also means, though, when I click the Run button, it will not tie up a panel in my switcher. It will submit this report to run in batch mode. So I won't watch it run. It won't show me it's running. I won't see when it ends. It will run in the background, and it will deliver the report output to me based on what I tell it in the delivery section here under Advanced. Now, when will it run batch? Well, it's currently set to run batch right now. In other words, when I click Run, it's going to submit it to run in the background in batch mode, if you will. And when it's done, it will deliver my outputs. Notice I've got a Later option. If you click on Later, you'll notice that you can tell it a date and time to run. So maybe you know I need this report. The data won't be ready until this afternoon, so I'm going to set this to automatically run and deliver this report to me at 4 o'clock. Okay, so you could do, you could do the run it once right now, or you could do this run it once at my date and time of my choosing. Essentially, it schedules this report to run exactly one time on the date and time you pick here. Now, how does it deliver the report to you? Well, let's click on Delivery and find out. When you click on Delivery, you'll see that you have 4 options to choose from. Now, the default option, Save Report, is what is shown here. Now, Save Report means that the outputs are going to be saved to this portal, and you have to come back and get them. And the way you get them is through the More on the report. So on this commission report, under More, one of those options is to pick up saved outputs that have been saved by running it in the background. So that's what Save Report means, and as you see, that's the default option. But you could say, send me this report by email. Go ahead and click that checkbox. And this is not just a send me the report option, guys. This is a send it to me and as many others as I wish. Of course, following the information distribution rules that we are, all subject to, right? We can't just send data all over the place willy-nilly. So, you have to follow the rules in terms of who you send stuff to. However, you can enter any email address here that you wish. You can even enter the email address of a distribution list. Now, if you were to just enter a recipient and click Done, the email that would get sent would actually include a hyperlink. And the person who receives it would click on a link. They'd have to log into COGNOS. And if they're not allowed to log into COGNOS, then they won't be able to pick up their output. But when they click on the link and log into COGNOS, it will give them the output. If I have 3 formats of outputs selected here in this panel, I will get 3 links, one to pick up format 1, another to pick up format 2, and so on. But the trick is, guys, that they have to be able to log into COGNOS and they have to have access to this report. A very secure way to distribute output. However, sometimes the people you're distributing output to can't log into COGNOS. In that case, you maybe want to have these outputs attached. So you can tick the Attach the Report button. And maybe those links are not of any value to the recipients. They're never going to click them, so you can uncheck link if you wish. You can fill in anything you want in the body part. You can turn on carbon copy and blind copy options if you wish. But you get this all set up here, and it will email the reports to you. For now, put your own email address in. Go ahead and keep the links enabled as well as the attach enabled. Print report means actually right after it's run, go ahead and print it on the printer I select. I can't say that's an option that's very popular, and it requires that people have set up your printers. Your administrator specifically has pre-set up your printers, so we're not going to work with that one right now. Save report as an external file would allow you to save this output to a share on disk. So this is a setting that your administrator has configured. Again, this is all about access rights. But you may have a share on a network drive where you can save outputs like Excel outputs and PDF outputs, and that way other people with access to that same network drive could access that output. So that's another option you guys have. For now, we'll just work with, in this case, the email output, and we'll leave the save there as well. I'm going to click Done. And I'm going to click Run. Well, no, I'm going to click the Now button, and then I'm going to click Run. So it'll run right now. And it will submit the report to run in the background, and in the fullness of time, I will get an email output. If I wanted to pick up my saved outputs, which are probably not there yet, they probably take a little bit more time to run than it did. But when they're there, go to the report, click on your More button or right-click on it, and view versions is how you will pick up saved outputs. If you click on View Versions, you'll see when it was run. And if you click on when it was run, if there are outputs, it will show them to you. And it will allow you to download those outputs. So you have to click on the date here. In this case, it says there were no saved outputs. Maybe I didn't click save. Maybe I unchecked save. I'm not sure why. I did just get an email with my attachments, though. If you click over here on the greater than, it should just give you information about the run itself. It would not give you, it would not give you the output per se. It would just tell you about the run. The run was successful, some emails were sent, and so on. If I go to my email here and bring up, oh, I see. When I clicked off of later and back on now, it lost my some of my options. That's what I'm thinking happened. So here's my attachment of my HTML output, and here's that link I'm talking about, right? So this attachment is my crosstab output. So whatever formats, if I had picked HTML, Excel, and PDF, I would have 3 attachments, and I would have 3 links. So that's a way to run the report in the background. Questions about running a report? Okay, so a quick recap. I can run a report by navigating to it, searching for it, and in general, if I click on the report, it's going to show me a run screen in my canvas, and I will wait at that point until the first page can be displayed, and it will display that first page if I'm running an HTML, or I'll wait until the entire report has been executed, and it will download that report for me as a PDF or an Excel or a CSV, etc. If I wish, I can use run as to override my default settings and run it right now. Or I can use it to override my default settings and run it in the background either now or later. And when I run in the background, I have additional options for delivery, like emailing it out, as well as saving it to the portal, and so on. But that's how you run reports in this tool. Now, when we ran it in the background, we did actually schedule this report to run exactly once on the date and time we specified, if we had chosen that later option, right? So, you know, this run as in the background, under advanced, in the later, I scheduled this report to run exactly once. Sometimes we want to schedule a report to run on a recurring basis. So let me show you how to do that. Now in your book, if you were following along, we just finished page 31. Page 32 doesn't apply to this version, I don't believe. No. So the share option that lets me create a hyperlink to send to people comes in a later release, not in the release you guys are using. So 32 is not germane to you, neither is 33. But 34 is, and that's where we're at right now. So sometimes I want to run a report on a recurring schedule. And there are 2 ways to do that. The first way is through this notion of a subscription. The second way is through a notion called a schedule. And there are differences between the 2, even though, in general, if you describe them, they sound the same. It's about scheduling a report to run on a recurring basis. The difference is that subscriptions are a very simple version of a schedule. So why don't we start with subscriptions, and then we'll finish with schedules. Any questions before we proceed? No?
Okay.
Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So again, if you would please click on Team Content. And again, it should keep us right where that commission report is. And I'm sticking with that because it's one we can all run. What I'd like you to do is run it. Well, first of all, if you have not set your preference to HTML, I'd like you to click over in the top right on the personal menu and choose My Preferences. And do please change your report format to HTML. It'll just make this next exercise work a little bit easier for all of us. It's not that the next exercise won't work with another format. It's just it's nice for us all to have the same screen. So after you've done that change, then please go back to Team Content. Right-click on that commissions report. And actually just choose Run As and click Run. You could have also just clicked on the name of the report. However, in a moment, I'll show you why that's not always the right option. But for now, we've run the report. We have on the screen the output we wish. And then we say to ourselves, Self, I really want to run this report on a recurring basis and have it automatically delivered to me. That's what a subscription does. And to tell COGNOS, I want to subscribe to this report, find the More button in the application toolbar. So it's on the top right of your screen. It's the first button in that cluster on the right. It's the ... button. And you'll notice when you click it, it contains subscribe. So please go ahead and click subscribe. Out will come the subscription panel. And it pre-picks today and it pre-picks the current time. And based on what's on my screen right now, COGNOS would run this report on a every Monday at 9:09 a.m. basis. It would run it in HTML format, and it would deliver it to me by saving it to the portal for me to pick up in that View Versions output. Now, you see that I can click on other days. So if I wanted to run it every weekday, I would just click on Monday through Friday. I could do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I could even toss in Saturday and Sunday runs if I want. But do you see, I can run it daily or weekly with a subscription. You can go ahead and keep today selected for sure because I want your subscription to run today as part of today's class. I want you to set the time, though, to be 9:15 so that it will run in the background at 9:15, and we'll come back and pick up our output from this subscription at that time. Where format is set, go ahead and click on the HTML that's there, and you'll notice you can run your subscription in multiple formats. Let's go ahead and choose the top 3 formats, Excel, PDF, and HTML. Please do not choose Excel data because that's not applicable to this crosstab report. And then click Done. On delivery, go ahead and click on it. On delivery, you'll see you've got the send by email, the save it, and the print. And again, the save is the default option. Please click on send the report by email and enable it, because I want you to see that there is no request for you to tell COGNOS to whom to send the output. Because with a subscription, the assumption is that this is for you. So the email will automatically be sent to you and only you if you choose the email delivery in your subscription. And notice you can do the link, the attachment, or both. You can go ahead and click on the attach just to have both there. So keep the save, keep the email options all selected. Notice there's no body, there's no carbon copy, blind copy. The who to send it to is exactly you and no one else. Click done to save that. So with multiple formats, with our delivery set, with our schedule set to include running today at 9:15, please go ahead and click the Create button. You will get a message that says your subscription was successfully created and you now have a schedule, a recurring instance of this report running on whatever cadence you set, at least every Monday at 9:15 a.m. If you click on your personal menu up where your name is in the top right, you'll notice an entry there called My Subscriptions. Please go ahead and select it. This is where you would come to manage all of the subscriptions you have running. Notice you could uncheck enabled, please don't in this case, but if you had a subscription that you wanted to turn off temporarily, you could come to this screen and uncheck the enabled on that subscription and that would turn it off temporarily. But it would keep it here for you to come back to later and re-enable when you wanted to. On the right-hand side, you'll notice the down arrow. Go ahead and click the down arrow, and you'll see that you could modify the subscription. Perhaps you want to change when it runs or how often it runs or your delivery options. You can view the last 5 runs as well as pick up outputs from the most current run if your delivery is saved here. And you can also permanently remove this subscription if you no longer want it. That's different than temporarily disabling it, right? That's a full-on remove it, I don't need it. Leave the subscription alone for now. I'd like it to run once before we come back here and delete it. Notice that My Subscriptions is listed in your switcher. Go ahead and click on your switcher and remove My Subscriptions from the switcher. And also remove this commissions report from your switcher because it will be running in the background shortly and we'll be able to pick it up when it's done. Subscriptions are a simple schedule that anybody who has access to the report could create on that report. And by the way, that's taken us through page 37 in your book. And page 38 will happen once the report has run. So we're going to wait on page 38. And instead, I'm going to give you a bonus feature that is not in your book, which is something called scheduling a report. Now, you might say to yourself, Rich, didn't you just tell me that subscribing to a report is also scheduling the report? And I'm going to say, yes, indeed, that's exactly what I told you. However, I also told you it's a simple schedule on your report, which implied that there is a more robust scheduling option for your report that you might use. And that is absolutely true. The more robust scheduling, though, has certain rules, which may not apply to you. These rules may preclude you from using the schedule. Since I'm the administrator, I know I'm okay. I'll be able to do this quick demonstration, but you may not, because you may not have update access to this report, because that's the first rule to apply a robust schedule, is that you must be able to update the report. So I'm going to go to my team content. So this might just be a watch instead of a do, because you may not have access to do it. I'm going to go to this report that I wish to schedule and bring up my context menu and go to Properties. If I have write access to the report, one of the properties that I'll have is Schedule. So to create this more robust schedule, I need write access to the item I'm scheduling. So that's part 1. Subscription, I didn't need write access to it. However, I do need it for a schedule. If I can add a schedule, I'll click New. I can put exactly one schedule on this report. Unlike subscriptions, which we were all able to apply to the same report, a schedule, exactly one, can be associated with a report. However, this is a more robust set of options. For example, I get a start and an end date. I not only have a daily or a weekly option, I've got a monthly option, a yearly option. So if you think about how you schedule a recurring appointments in your email system, you've got virtually all of the same options here in terms of scheduling. So if I wanted to do on a monthly basis the first Tuesday of every month, I have those kinds of options here, which I do not have when I subscribe. That's why I mean it's a bit more robust. My formats are the same though. I can have one or more of the formats. My delivery options are also basically the same, although you notice that I can do the save my output externally here where I could not in a subscription. And if I enable email, it lets me send this report to any recipient, not just myself. So subscriptions, simple schedules that are for me, where I can run on a daily or a weekly basis in any format, and I can deliver it to myself by saving it or by emailing it to myself. A schedule, I must have write access to the report. Exactly one schedule can be associated with that report, but I can run it on much more interesting cadences, and I have more robust delivery options. Now, at this point, if you've been clicking around your interface, you might have noticed in the bottom left corner, the notifications button has a number on it, a red number. That is your indication, and that's what notifications is for, is this indication of subscriptions that have run. You have a subscription that has run, but you have not yet read the outcome. So there's one unread notification available to you. If you click on notifications, it will show you that unread notification. If you hover but do not click on the item, you'll notice a little trash can. That's how you delete this notification. If you click on the notification, it will read it, and because we said to save the output, it will give you access to those outputs here. And so I've got 3 links because I had 3 formats. Also, you should have in your inbox an email with those 3 attachments and those options if you included the email option. I don't have that email because you see I'm logged in as Dan, so it went to Dan, right, because I wasn't able to put in a different email address. But for you, it should have worked and it should be in your email. I'm going to go ahead and hover over this notification and click my trash can to remove it. Okay, and so that was my subscription running. And then next week, Monday at 9:15, it's going to run again. I don't want it to. So I'm going to remove that subscription now. I'm going to go over to my personal menu. I'm going to click on my subscriptions. I'm going to, on the right-hand side of my subscription, click on the down arrow, and I'm going to choose delete this subscription. And then I'm going to go to my switcher, and I'm going to remove my subscriptions. Okay, so we've run a report interactively, and we know that in general we can click on a report to run it on its name, and it'll run it right now in my default format. Do keep in mind, however, that if there are saved outputs on a report you click on, it will show you the saved output for that report. It will not show you a current run of that report. In other words, it won't run it right then. It'll show you the saved output if the saved output exists. So that's why earlier I said many times when I click on a report, it's going to run that report right now, but not always. If there's a saved output on the report, it's going to show you the saved output, which is what it's doing right now on this commission report, because we said we have indeed got a saved output. Now, you might say to yourself, well, gee, maybe I don't want that saved output. Heck, that saved output could have been done last week. I want fresh data. Well, the way to always guarantee the report's going to run right now and go get fresh data is to use run as. So run as is 100% run the report with fresh data. Clicking on the report name itself, if there is no saved outputs for that report, it will run with fresh data. But if there is a saved output for that report, it will show you the saved output. So clicking on a report name sometimes runs the report with new data. Run as always runs the report with new data. So do keep in mind that clicking on the name of a report is a sometimes activity. Now, it's very easy to tell. If you click on a report and you get this pop-up that includes this a prompt page, for example, like this one, or if you click on a report and it shows you that running, spinning icon, then it's running right now. It's absolutely not showing you a saved output. But if you click on a report and it doesn't show you that running icon, instead it just immediately shows you an output like this, then you know it's showing you a saved output. The other way to know if you have a question mark in your mind, guys, is to look at the URL in your browser. Notice it says perspective equals saved output. So that's your other cue that this is not fresh data right now. This is data from some previous run. So there's many ways to tell. This one's definitive, this saved output one in your URL. The other ways are also, I think, pretty straightforward to note. Run as always runs the report right now and retrieves the current data. So in your book, we've covered page 37, which was picking up your subscription, and page 38 about going to your My Subscriptions. And in 39, we did remove our subscription. Page 40 is complete. Page 41 is complete. So we have completed the Navigating COGNOS Analytics curriculum. And the idea here was to take you through the portal, show you what all the pieces are, give you the names. The names are important because if you read documentation, they use those names. And so it's good to know the official names of things, I think. We talked about the navigation bar on the left, the application toolbar on the top. We talked about your canvas in the documentation that's also referred to as your work area. We talked about navigating with Search My Content, Team Content, and Reset. We talked about closing and any open items using your switcher, as well as moving from open item to open item in your switcher. The last thing I'll tell you in this section of the class before we take a break is how to log off. So the log off in COGNOS is actually under your personal menu. You'll see there's a sign out there. A lot of folks don't use that, however, because it's not strictly necessary. And I believe you guys have single sign-on turned on, where you didn't have to type in your username and password. And if you click sign out, it'll actually just sign you back in automatically again because you have single sign-on turned on. So the way you guys are going to log out of COGNOS is actually quite straightforward. And you don't have to do it right now because we're just going to take a quick break and come back. But when you're ready to log out for the day, just close your browser. It's as simple as that. You don't have to close everything that's open in your switcher before you log out. However, if you have unsaved changes on something that's open, you are going to want to save them first. When you go to close your browser, you will get a pop-up that tells you you've got unsaved changes. If you ignore it, then you will lose all of those changes by closing your browser. You get that one last chance. Instead of doing that right now, because we're just going to take a 5-minute break, and then actually let's take a 10-minute break. 5 minutes is it's hard to get anything done in 5 minutes. We'll take a 10-minute break, which according to this clock would bring us back at 9:37 to start the next class. before you do that, go ahead, please, and remove this report from your switcher. And then just leave your browser open. Please take a break. I'm going to do so as well and put myself on mute. And when we come back at 9:37, we're going to start the other class, which is the class on writing reports. So I'll talk to you in 10. Your way. If you could restart the recording. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, done.
I appreciate it. Excellent. All right, guys. We have switched books now to the CA Report Authoring Chromolux PDF. I will be, I think, a bit more precise about what page we're on. This is a 163-page document. We're going to try to cover pretty much everything that's in this book today, Wednesday, and Thursday, although we may not get there. It depends on how many questions you have, to be honest. The last chapter, which is conditional styles, may or may not fit into the time we have together. However, by the time we get to that point in the book, you should have the confidence to execute that module on your own without any concerns. But our goal with this class is to teach you how to create reports, list reports, crosstab reports, and chart reports, filter to focus those reports, add calculations when that's appropriate so that you can derive new data from your corporate data on those reports, and then again, if there's time, conditionally format your reports to highlight exceptional values. So that's the, if you will, that's sort of the breadth of the information that we are going to share together today. In your book, if you skip forward past the title page and the contents and so on, onto page 4, just tells you this is the introduction. Page 5 tells you for this chapter, we're going to talk about how all this reporting stuff fits together. We're going to talk about this concept called metadata, which literally means data about your data and how that applies to writing a report. We'll talk about the types of outputs that you can produce in a report. I've already named them for you before: lists, crosstabs, and charts. But we'll talk a little bit more about what they're for. We'll talk about the reporting interface. So we've learned the portal interface. As you'll see, when we start to create a new report, you'll have a new set of buttons to learn about and a new set of options and tools. And then we'll talk about the process for creating a report. So that's sort of all overview introduction stuff. And then we're going to jump into a module where we create some list reports, then we create some crosstab reports, and then we create some chart reports. Now, we are scheduled to be together today until about 11:30 Eastern time. And so, you know, it's sometime between 11 and 11:30 based on where we are in the book. We'll call a halt to today's lesson. We'll just look for a good breaking point. And then we will pick up again to Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern time from where we leave off. So let's get to it. On page 6 of your book, there is a diagram that describes how the COGNOS system fits together, if you will, an architecture diagram. Now, the pictures there are very high level. They're not, I'm not going to say they're technically correct, they're logically correct. On the left-hand side is all of your data. On the right-hand side is you. And in the middle is COGNOS Analytics. So you, using a browser or a mobile device, will log into the COGNOS Analytics portal, which we've just spent some time learning. From there, you can navigate using search or team content or my content or your recent list. Or if you're using a browser, not a mobile device, but a seated browser, you can create new things like reports and dashboards and so on. Or you could even upload files or manage the system from there. Now, because we're focused on reporting, a new concept comes up called metadata. And you're going to hear me talk about packages and data modules. And a package is one of the two forms of metadata. A data module is the second. They serve the same purpose even though they're built using different tools. And the purpose is to expose your data assets so that you can place them on a report. That's what they're for. There's a person in your organization or people who would be known as your modelers. And their job is to create these packages and data modules, this metadata, and make that metadata available to you, the report author. And a package, this is what we're going to use today, a package, which, by the way, is created through a tool called Framework Manager. You might hear that term, so you might as well be familiar with it. Your modelers have created, using Framework Manager, a collection of packages that expose certain data assets for you. And they've organized those data assets. They could be very, very complex layouts, but they've tried to make the packages simple. In other words, their job as a modeler is to provide you with a view of the data that is straightforward to leverage to create reports. That's kind of part of their job. No package in general means no report. You've got to have metadata, some way to access your back-end data assets, and that's what a package gives you. So the model, the metadata, is your gateway to data in your systems. Now, the model is not a copy of your data. It's a description of your data. That's why it's known as metadata. A package and a data module are data about your data. And it tells you what data you have access to, and it tells COGNOS how to go get it. So when you drag a column and drop it in a report and you hit run, you don't have to tell it how to get that data. You've told it what data you want and how you want to display it. And the metadata is what translates that request to something that can read that data from your database. So all of that's happening behind the scenes on your behalf. On page 7 in your book, it describes the metadata. Just the fact that it's about tables in your database and relationships between those tables. It tells you that packages come from Framework Manager. It tells you that data modules are created in the portal using the data module tool, which is a web-based tool. Every report you write will be based on a package or a data module. And today we're going to use packages. On page 8, it describes the different types of reports you can create with the reporting tool. And you can see it's more than what I've mentioned. It's more than just lists, crosstabs, and charts. There's other things. I mentioned lists, crosstabs, and charts because that's what we cover in this class. There is other training from LPA that Chromalox might purchase that covers these other data containers, as they're called. But today, the data containers we're going to leverage are lists, crosstabs, and charts. But all of the data containers are shown on page 8 and are described on page 9 in text. We're going to start when we get to the first chapter where we're actually creating a meaningful report together. We're going to start with a list. A list is the most detailed form of data. That data container consists of a collection of columns. You drag columns into that container. And when you run the report, it reads those columns from the database and presents those rows. As you'll find out, there's a couple of important caveats to what I just said, but in general, what I just said is what happens. A crosstab is a pivot table. The crosstab, not only can you define columns to display, but you can also define rows resulting in a matrix. And in the intersections of that matrix, you present interesting numeric data. We just saw a crosstab in the report that we were experimenting with earlier in this session. And then a chart is a graphical output of your data. So lists and crosstabs are what we would consider tabular outputs, just two forms. a column-oriented form, which is a list, and a rows and column form, which is a crosstab. A chart is a graphical output where you're getting a picture instead of a tabular result. And the pictures can help you see relationships a bit more easily, I think, than a list would. And a crosstab, it sort of fits somewhere between there. A crosstab, you can see relationships, but a chart is one of those pictures worth 1,000 words kind of outputs, where you can really highlight certain insights that you want your user to have. And those are the 3 data containers we're going to cover in this report authoring class. Now, beginning on page 10 and continuing for multiple pages are a description of the interface. And I'm not going to sit here and read you these slides and show you nothing because A, that would be boring, and B, I'm not sure it's as instructive as it could be. Now, once again, I will tell you that the book you have has been written for a newer version of COGNOS than the one you're using. So these pictures will not align directly to the interface we're about to see. When you upgrade, then what you have in the book and what you'll have in the interface will be the same. Let's launch the reporting interface and start a new report. To get started with a brand new report, I want you to click your New button. And when the list comes up of new objects you can create, I want you to click Report. On your canvas, the reporting tool will begin to launch, and the first 2 questions that you're being asked are, what is the package that represents the data you wish to put on this report? Number 1, and number 2, what is the layout of the report you'd like to start with, technically called the template? Has anyone got any trouble getting this far? I just want to be sure that everybody's got access to the reporting tool, and we've all got this pop-up on our screen. Is everybody good? Yes? I just need one yes. Just somebody give me a yes. Is there anybody there?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Okay. All right. If you would please, where the package entry is, I want you to find the ellipsis button, the More button on the right-hand side of that blank, and click it. And you'll get a pop-up. By the way, if you have pop-up blocker turned on in your browser, COGNOS will probably not function for you. You'll end up with problems. So hopefully your pop-up blocker has been turned off. We're going to navigate and pick a package for this little demo. We're not going to write a report that we're keeping. We're just going to have a package and create some things so we can learn the interface. And what I'd like you to do in the team content is navigate to the folder called Packages and click on it. That's a single click, my friends. In the list of packages, ideally, this, and I've been told this is true, but we'll see, I want you to find the Global Sales package and then click the Open button. So click on the words Global Sales and then click Open. And that will select the Global Sales package for use in this report. And that, by the way, is the package we're going to use pretty much the entire class. The book describes using sample data in the exercises. We're going to translate that on the fly to your data because the sample data is not loaded. Now, I will ask Dan about loading the sample data between now and Thursday so we can do the exact exercises in the book. However, there are workshops in the book that use your data to really drive home the concepts anyway. And if we have to, because the samples can't be loaded in time for the class, then we'll stick with all your data for all examples, which you might find is a better way to go anyway. With the Global Sales package selected, please select List as your starting template and click OK. and you will be brought into the reporting interface. And as you can see in the application bar, there's a bunch of new buttons at the top. Your switcher hasn't changed. It says new because we're creating a new report. We haven't saved it and given it a name yet, so it doesn't have a name. And then on the right-hand side, we've gotten a couple of other new buttons, including an eyeball and 3 lines with circles. And then we've got the More button, but More has different things now. And our canvas is showing the work area for creating a report. In your navigation bar, you also have some new buttons. And so on page 10 of your book, even though it's not identical to what we see in this version 4 of the software, it's close. This is the older interface from 11.04. Remember, the 11.0 series is currently on 11.0.13, which came out last week. And when you upgrade, it'll exactly match the book. Let's take a look at the button at the top left on your screen. If you hover over it, it tells you that that's your data button. If you click it, which I will ask you to please do, you'll see slide out a panel. And that panel has 2 tabs, source and data items. And in it, you'll see the package that we selected, the global sales package, is listed there. Okay? So this is your data button. This is the data that's available for your report. The next button down is your toolbox button. So let's click it quickly right now so you can see that there is a collection of tools, and those tools are themselves grouped into things like pinned and textual and layout. You see those triangles next to the names on the left of the names? Those are expand buttons. If you click one, you'll see that it expands that section and shows you the tools. If you click that button again, it will collapse that area. Again, we're just going through the pieces. We'll explore these pieces in more detail in a moment. The third button down, this is called your Navigate button. This button has been changed multiple times as the tool progressed in 11.05, 11.06, and so on. So this button, if you go ahead and click the Navigate button, it exposes your Pages view. That's the first tab. It exposes your Queries view, which is the second tab. And it exposes your Condition view, which is the third tab. In your book on page 10, you'll see that in the release that's current, they've split this button in 2. And they've given you a button just for this Pages view. And a second button labeled Queries in the book gives you these other 2 views, the Queries view and the Condition view. That's the only difference. Otherwise, what's in the book on the left is exactly the same from a data and toolbox perspective. The Navigate button has been split into 2 buttons later in the release. That's the difference. What they do and what they're for hasn't changed. It's just the access to them. So that's the left-hand side. Along the top, you have a Save button. Down on the right-hand side of the Save button, you have this little down arrow. If you click that little down arrow, that's where you get Save as well as a couple of other options. The next button over is your Edit button. If you want to get rid of that Save As menu, you can click on that little down arrow again. The next button over is your Edit button. Notice that it's dark. That means that you are in edit mode for this report, which makes sense because we're editing a brand new report. You have an Undo button, a Redo button, and then you have a Run button, which will allow us to test our report in any format we wish. So we'll come back to that button in a minute. The switcher is the switcher. It does what it does. That hasn't changed. Moving on, you have this eyeball, which is known as the Page Views button. If you click on it, you'll see that there are 3 views that we can use while writing a report. Click on it again to close that menu. The next button is your Properties button. Go ahead and click on it, and you'll note a panel slides from the right-hand side. And we'll explore this panel a bit more. For now, though, before we close the panel, click somewhere in your work area in the center. I don't care what you click on. I'm just going to click on the back background of my report, just so you can see now that the property sheet has a bunch of properties in it that we can change. We'll come back and look at properties later. For now, find that properties button at the top right in your application bar and click it again, and that will close your property sheet. More is the next button. If you click on More, you'll see that it has different options now than it did when we were running a report. Remember, we clicked on More to subscribe to a report when we were running it. Here, More is specific to things that I need to do from time to time in my report. You can go ahead and click on your More button again to close it. Your personal menu and your help have not changed, so we don't have to focus there. In my work area or canvas is where I will actually define my report. You might notice an empty data container, an empty list. The reason this is here is because we chose the list template when we created this report, and because we chose the list template, it placed an empty list on our report page to start. It also gave us this default title for our report, as well as this default footer, which shows the date the report was run, the time the report was run, and the page. So the pages will be automatically numbered. So those are all the components of the interface that we're going to be working with as we write reports. On page 11, it tells us a bit more about the data pane. If you would please, on the top left of your navigation bar, please click on your data button to expose your package. So on the data pane, you see the metadata you selected, whether that was a package or a data module. We have our global sales package there. And you can see that the global sales package is organized into two folders. The folder we're going to use is called the Report Studio folder. Notice the expand button next to it. Please click it and expand the available data. Now, you have a collection of icons there, and there's a lot of icons in the tool, and I think it's fairly important to learn what they mean, especially because different types of data behave differently when you put them on your report. So even though it's not there on page 11, I'm going to give you a little key right now to understand your package and know the names of the different pieces of your package. So Global Sales is the name of your package, okay? Report Studio is a folder within that package. Sales information technically is called a query subject. A query subject represents a collection of information. Like this is all of the information about sales. You've got another query subject called sales cost. You've got another one that tells you all about the product hierarchy of the products you sell. You've got another one that's all about the customers to whom you sell, and so on. So this global sales package was designed by your modeler to include all of the data your modeler believes you would need to create sales analysis reports. And then they've organized your data for you into these query subjects, hopefully in a way that makes sense, makes it easy to find what you're looking for. When you need to put information about your customer on your report, customer information is the query subject that should contain it. When you want to put product information on your report, product hierarchy should be about where that is. You have to learn your packages. You're going to find that you write reports probably across multiple packages. I'd say that's true of most folks, although it's possible that you'll have one package that you use all the time. It really does depend. But regardless, you need to learn what's in your package and where all of the interesting data is. Your modeler has tried to organize your package in a logical way, starting with the use of query subjects and folders. However, still, when you open up sales information and expand it, you know, what you're looking for may or may not actually be there. you may have to go look elsewhere, even though in your mind it logically is sales information. You follow me? It's all a matter of where your modeler put it. Ultimately, guys, if you need something on a report and you've examined the entire package and it's not there, the only way for you to be able to include that information in your report is for your modeler to modify the package and add the missing information. So they'll either put you in queue to modify the package, or they'll tell you, oh, you missed it, it's in this query subject, one of those two outcomes, right? If we look at sales information, you'll see that there are 3 icons of the items listed there. Those items are technically known as query items. A lot of people like to think of the query subjects as tables and the query items as columns. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a reasonably good approximation of what these things are. Even though it's not technically correct, I think as a report author, it works. So if that makes you comfortable in terms of knowing the difference, that sales information is a table of columns, and some of those columns are plant and sales order number and customer PO number and the date of the order and the acknowledgement date and so on. If that makes sense to you, that's a perfectly fine allegory. Again, knowing the proper names is useful when you read documentation, and that's why I want to be sure you know the proper names. Now, those 3 query item icons have some meaning. So this first icon, this blue bar icon, technically known as an attribute icon. The second icon, with the little 3-headed arrow in the bottom corner, that's technically known as an identifier. And then the icon with the yellow ruler in it, that's technically known as a measure. Okay? So if you wanted to take a note, blue bar is attribute, 3-headed arrow is identifier, yellow ruler is a measure. You can remember that, right, because we measure things with rulers. Okay? Each of these icons give you a little bit of information about the item. For example, quantity is a measure. This is a number that I should be expecting to aggregate, to roll up, to subtotal on my report, because that's what measures are. They're numbers that are interesting to aggregate. Sales order number, however, is a number, but it's not a number that I would ever aggregate. I wouldn't add 2 sales order numbers together. So sales order number is not a measure. Sales order number is an attribute, but it's not a measure, and that's actually the more important thing. In fact, I typically tell folks to think of their data as measures and non-measures. And the fact that it's an attribute or an identifier is not critical for you to care about. Is it a measure or is it not a measure are the 2 most important things to remember. So invoice number, year, those are numbers we don't roll up. Those should never have a measure icon. Quantity, unit price, the revenue, the extended price, the billed price, those sorts of things. Those are measures. Those are numbers that we would indeed tend to want to roll up or summarize on a report. So that's the key to the city. That's the key to reading your package. On page 12, it has us click on the toolbox. Let's go ahead and click on the toolbox. So the toolbox is a collection of things you can put on your report page. You won't end up using all of them, but there's a lot of them that you will use, and there's some that you're going to use more often than others. So the pinned list is actually, we're going to come back to the pinned list. Instead, what I'd like you to do is expand textual, for example, and just get a feel for the fact that you could put text on your report page. You could create calculations and put them on your report page. There's something here called a tuple that you could put on. And you notice if you hover over the items, it tells you a little bit about what each one is. Expand data container. and you'll see list, crosstab, chart. Those data containers that I described earlier in the book are there. Now, why are they in the toolbox? Well, because maybe on my report, I actually like to express 2 charts and a list, or a chart and a crosstab. In other words, I can put more than one data container on my report page if I wish. How do I get the second container on? If my first container came from my template, I drag it on from my toolbox and add it to my canvas. There are prompting tools there as well. And then there's a collection of so-called advanced tools. So all of these tools are available for you to place on your report page. You'll find you use a bunch of them more often than you use others. Now, you might have noticed in Pinned I have text item tool, but it's also in textual. I also have a list tool under Pinned, but I have a list also under data container. You see, Pins are copies of existing tools. They're supposed to be your favorite tools because Pinned is always open when you open your toolbox. It's always the item that's expanded. And these items are the items that in theory you use the most. So this is sort of your quick access to your favorite tools. Now, maybe this list isn't actually your favorite tools. This is sort of the default starting list. So you're going to want to manage your pinned items. So let's take a quick gander at how we do that. Let's suppose that the query calculation tool is a tool you use quite often, and you'd like to add it to your pinned list. If you expand textual, you'll see that the query calculation tool is there. If you right-click on query calculation, you'll note you get an add to pinned items. Go ahead and click add to pinned items, and you note that the query calculation is now pinned. Perhaps you find that the crosstab item is not one of your favorite tools, that you don't use it very often. You could right-click on it, and you see you could remove it. Please don't. You could remove it from your pinned toolbox items. You could also change the order of the items in your pinned by using move up and move down, which implies that the order somehow matters, and indeed it does. But I can't illustrate why it matters on my screen right now without deleting my empty list. So I'm going to ask that you just watch at this point rather than do, just so you can see what I'm about to do. So at this point, as you can see, I've added my query calculation to my pinned items. I'm going to delete this empty list. And I want you to see in the center of my screen, I've got this gray plus shortcut button. And when I click my shortcut button, you'll notice that I get a wheel of tools. This wheel of tools is the first 6 pinned tools. So notice, my query calculation is my 7th pinned tool. It is not in my shortcut. However, if I right-click on query calculation, I move it up 1, knocking chart down to my 7th item. If I click on my wheel now, you see chart is gone and query calculation is there in its place. So this shortcut will appear from time to time in your work area, especially if you add a table to organize your page layout. Every cell in the table will have one of these little shortcut tools in it, and it's easy access to your first 6 pins. That's what it's for. When we clicked on our template, we clicked on a template where we had a list pre-added to the page. Therefore, the shortcut tool is not visible. That's why I had to delete it in order to show you the shortcut tool. So that's why the order of your pins matters. I'm going to ask you, if you added the query calculation tool to your pins, I want you to right-click on it and remove it from your pins. That way, all of us will have the same first 6 items in the same order. just to keep us all on the same page. But over time, you will absolutely find there are tools you're using a lot, and it will make sense to pin those tools. And it may even make sense to reorder those pinned tools so that the shortcuts that will be available in your work area from time to time show you the proper tools, the most important tools that you use. But for now, let's leave the pinned items as they are. The toolbox is the collection of objects you can put on your page. We'll be using the toolbox from time to time throughout the class. On page 13, it tells us to click on the Pages button. That's, of course, because in the newer version, the Navigate button has been split in two. For now, let's just click on the Navigate button and be sure we click on the very first tab, which is the Pages tab. And you'll see that the Pages tab in your book on page 13 and the one you have on your screen look the same now. And it's made up of a couple of collections of pages. So Report Pages collection, which includes a single page right now, and that's actually the page in our work area that has the empty list on it. There's also this thing called Prompt Pages, which are not covered in this class. If you were to take the advanced class, which is an additional 2 days of training, then we would cover Prompt Pages in that class. And then there's this classes thing. Again, we don't cover that in this class. However, they are described here on page 13. In this class, we focus on creating reports that contain one page that might also contain multiple views of data, though. It might contain a couple of lists or a couple of crosstabs and that kind of thing. But we don't get into multi-page definition reports in this class. But when you want to create them, and after you take this class, you might find that you can read the documentation and figure out all of these other things on your own without taking another class. This page 13 tells you what each of these collections is and what they're for. But this is your pages view. What are the pages defined in my report? And it also lets you navigate from page to page so that each page you click on in this view will appear in your canvas for you to view and modify. The next tab over on your screen is the Queries tab. That's what is also now shown on page 14. And this shows you all of the queries that have been defined in your report. Now, COGNOS writes these queries on your behalf. As we put data in our data containers, COGNOS manages the query that is populating the data container with data when we run. So every data container is associated with a query. As I drop data from my package into my container, COGNOS manages and defines the query that will supply the data when I click Run to execute my report. There are reasons for you to change your work area to the query work area and modify the contents of your query. But that happens seldom in a basic report, and we won't spend a lot of time there in this particular class. However, in the advanced class, we would get into directly manipulating your queries using the Query button. The next Explorer over is called your Condition Explorer. Again, not something we're going to cover in this class. I just want you to know that it's here. And when you do sophisticated conditional formatting in a report, you are going to need to know about this button. But until then, it's just a matter of knowing the things in the interface. And page 14 introduces you to those buttons. We are going to use the next button. If you look in the upper right side on the application toolbar, you're going to find an eyeball icon. And that is technically called your page views icon. Go ahead and click it, and you'll see the 3 page views that are also shown on page 15. Page design is the view we are in now. Now, what page design view is for is to allow us to define the contents of our report, but not see the data that's going to be presented in our report while we design our report. And there's good reasons to do that. In fact, when I write a report, for the most part, my view is design, as opposed to this other view that I use a lot, which is the second view down called page preview. Now, page preview allows me to author my report, make modifications, but see the data as I go. Now, you will find that you will develop a habit. You'll find that maybe you develop with page preview turned on most of the time and you only use page design sometimes. Or you might find you use page design most of the time and you only use page preview sometimes. The second one is what I do. There's no wrong answer. You do what makes sense for you. Page design lets me lay out my report without viewing data while I do it. Page preview allows me to lay out my report while seeing data while I do it. Page structure, unusual to leverage. It shows my report page as a hierarchy. Now, because my report page is not particularly interesting and there's no data to show, switching views right now, not going to be a useful thing. So let's create a quick report. Nothing fancy, just something super quick so that we have the ability to look at these different views and see what they look like. To do that, I want you to click on the on the data button in the top left of the nav bar. That will bring your package back into view. In your package, if you haven't done so already, please expand the Report Studio folder and the sales information query subject. I would like you to drag the sales order number and drop it inside your empty list. So click and hold your mouse button down on SO pound, and then drag your mouse over inside the list. You'll see 3 bars up here with the middle one flashing. Lift your mouse button, and that will drop the sales order number into your list. Now you see I'm not seeing actual sales order numbers, am I? I'm seeing that the first column in the list I've defined will show me sales order columns when I run the report, and I'll get my sales order numbers in a row. However, page design is never going to show me data while I author. Let's click on that page views button, guys, and switch to page preview. And now you'll see actual data on your sales order. You with me? So page design, structure of my report, but not the data too. Page preview, structure and data. So I can author in either mode. Now, why is it that I said I use design and then switch to preview every once in a while? Well, every time I change my report while in preview mode, it's got to go out and retrieve my data. Go back to the database and get my data a second time. That can be fairly slow in a report. For example, you could do this with me. I'm going to add sales order type to my list. Now, you've got to be precise with your drop. I want you to drag sales order type. I don't want you to drop it, though, until you've put your mouse inside the title of sales order number. Inside that. Don't put this on the edge of sales order number. Put it a little bit inside the sales order number title. And then lift up on your mouse and drop it. Now, you see, I had to wait. And then it was, because it went out, it had to retrieve the sales order type. Well, that can slow you down while you write your report, yes? So rather than every drag and drop I do, I have to wait in between. What I do is I would switch, you can go ahead and do this with me, back to page design. I would drag my items on. Let's suppose I want my sales order line number as my next column. So again, drag it. Put your mouse inside the column you wish it next to, not on the edge of that column, inside that column. Drop it. You see, I don't have to wait to then grab the ship date and add that to my report. You with me? You see how it's very speedy to write my report. But then I'm like, I wonder if this looks the way I expected. That's when I would switch to page preview. And then I wait once for it to retrieve my data rather than every time I drop data in. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Now, the third view, if you click on your Page Views button and go to Page Structure, is a view I don't use very often. I can count on one hand, I think, when I've had to use this view. You see it shows you your page definition as a hierarchy. So you have a page. On it, you've got a header, a body, and a footer. In the body of the page, you have a list. That list has a collection of list columns. In those list columns, you have these items. And each column is made up of a title and a body. You see, this is a structural view, a hierarchical view of your page definition, not a view I use very often. So now that you know it's there, you know if you get it, you say, oh, I know, it's page structure. I'd have to pick design or preview to get back to a view I'm familiar with. So I wanted to show it to you in case you inadvertently get here, and you know just to click on your page views. And let's pick a page design for right now as we continue our exploration of the interface. On page 16 in your book, it has us enable the property sheet. So in the application bar, right next to the page views button, is the properties button. Go ahead and click the properties button. It's technically the show properties button, because when you click it, it shows the properties. Now, the property sheet that's shown is the properties that are associated with what you have clicked in the canvas. So just click on different things in your canvas, and you'll see that the property sheet changes and that you get different properties depending on where you click. Okay? So the property sheet is sensitive to what you've clicked in the canvas, in the work area of your report. If you click in your model, in your package, and people call it model and package interchangeably, don't let that throw you. If you click inside your package on a data item, you'll notice no property sheet changes. It's not paying attention to what you click in that left-hand pane. It's only paying attention to what you click in the large middle pane. So if you need to set a property, well, what's a property? The color of the text, the size of the text, and background color. How wide this particular column could be, that sort of thing. Those are all properties. And you could set them by first selecting the item you wish to change, and then second, in the property sheet, updating that property. Now, as you clicked around, you might have noticed that there's a toolbar that's floating around near the item you clicked. That toolbar is also known as the on-demand toolbar, and again, is unique. What buttons are on that toolbar depend on what you click. If I click on the background of my canvas, the page body, I get a collection of tools that's very different than if I click on the ship date in my list, you see. So the toolbar is a lot like the property sheet. It's displayed specifically for the item you clicked. Now, the buttons and the property sheet actually have a lot of overlap. And some folks find the property sheets intimidating to use. They're not the friendliest layout, whereas the buttons are kind of friendly. And so in many instances, we're going to leverage the buttons rather than the property sheets, even though I could have done the property sheet to do the same thing. In other words, the buttons and the property sheet have a lot of overlap. There are a few things you can only do with the property sheet. Now, at the top left of the property sheet, regardless of what property sheet you have open, guys, the top left has a button. It looks like a box with dots. It's the Ancestor button. If you put your mouse over it, it says Select Ancestor. If you click it, it will show you the ancestor list. So I happen to be clicked on the ship date body. And you always read this ancestry list from the bottom. So my ship date body's parent is the entire column, the heading and the body. And that parent of this one column is all the columns in my list. The parent of those columns is my list. The parent of the list is the page body. Parent of the page body is the whole page, and the page parent is a report. So it's called the ancestor list. And we'll come back to this ancestor list in an exercise because we use this to be efficient about setting properties. So we'll come back to the ancestor list. For right now, again, the goal with this module is to learn the interface. When I say click your ancestor button, I mean to click the button at the top left of your property sheet. Moving on, please click the More button in the application bar on the right-hand side, and that will match page 17 in your book. Page 17 tells you what all of these features are. Fact is, it's not typical to need to use these. These are seldom used tools, not commonly used tools. In this class, we're only going to click ever on this one entry here called Options. In the advanced class, we would use other components up here. We might come back to this if you ask me a question and I need to use one of these tools to answer your question and show you a thing, because questions are encouraged and welcome, of course, as we go. But for now, just know that this is your More button, and when I tell you we're going to update the report options, we're going to click More and click Options, and that'll come up in a later exercise. And that's page 17. Page 18 shows a feature that is not yet available to you in the release that you're running. And so I'm not going to spend time on it today, but when you upgrade, your administrator may enable this thing called My Parameters. Until he enables it, it's not worth spending any more time on. Page 19 talks about the basic steps to create a report. And I'm going to emphasize one step on page 19. So to create a report, you launch a new report. You specify the package you wish. You pick your metadata. Remember, it could be something called a data module. Right now, a lot of your data is exposed through packages. Nothing wrong with that. Your modelers have an alternate tool that they could create a data module from. As far as you're concerned, when you write a report, it doesn't matter if it's a data module or a package. You write your report basically the same way. After you've picked your metadata, you lay out your report. You lay it out by picking a data container, right? You can pick by either picking a blank template and adding the data container you want by hand, or by picking one of the other templates, the list template, the cross-tab template, and so on. And then you add data to that data container. Now, the next step is the step that I find, unfortunately, a lot of people skip. They add the data, they run the report, they don't get an error, they save the report, and they're done. And they skip this validate step. So I want to emphasize, as report authors, as people who are writing reports for your organization and giving folks reports, there's an expectation on the people who get your reports that you know that the data in the report is correct. And just because a report runs and doesn't blow up and give you an error doesn't mean that report is showing you the correct data. Maybe you didn't filter the report and focus the report quite right to the subset of data that's interesting. Maybe this is supposed to be a month-to-date report, but it's showing last month and this month by mistake. Unless you do this validation step and you convince yourself that it's showing you the proper data, in my little example, it's only showing you current month data, then there's a chance, right, that a person using this, thinking it's month to date, actually having inflated numbers, will make bad decisions based on the data in the report. So the most important thing on page 19, in my opinion, is this notion of, as report authors, one of our jobs, one of the things that the business is counting on us to do when we write a report is to validate that it's producing the proper output. So please keep that in mind. That's one of your responsibilities. Once you've completed the report, you've validated it, you save it, you can run it interactively. If you saved it to the team content or your administrator has moved it to team content, then it can be run by others. They can subscribe to it. Perhaps they can even schedule it. And they can leverage the report in the same fashion that we learned how to run reports earlier this morning. After you've developed a library of reports, guys, you're going to find that, A, there's never been a report written that doesn't get tweaked from time to time. So you're going to end up editing those reports. It's just that, the business keeps changing. And so you make changes to your report that kind of go along with how you view the business from time to time as the business view changes. The other reason, though, you might start with an existing report is lots of times the new report you need to write can be really efficiently created by starting with an existing report, giving it a new name, and tweaking that report versus starting from scratch. So as you develop a library of reports, I think you're going to find that starting with an existing report, doing a save as, so you give it a new name, and then modifying it will be more efficient for you than starting from scratch each and every time. But as you get underway with your first set of reports, you don't have that library, so you'll start from scratch. So that is your interface and all of the components and their names, as well as just a quick notion about metadata and about authoring a report. The next chapter in your book begins on page 21, but the meat of it begins on page 23, and that is list reports. Now, what I'd like to do is actually share my screen temporarily so I can go through some slides with you and then switch back to the actual interface here on the other computer. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen and bring up some slides. Can you guys see my screen and the slides?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. I love it when a plan comes together. So this module, I'm going to talk to you a bit more in detail about list reports and how they work. And then we'll talk about this notion of grouping your report, some formatting options you have, and some sorting options that you have, as well as when we're working with those measures, those interesting numbers that we aggregate, some options you have for doing that aggregation. So on this page, which in your book, let's see, so I can just show you what page we're on, should be page 23. I'm showing you a list, and there's actually a bit going on behind the scenes that it's worth talking about. So the first thing I'll tell you is when I created this report, I clicked New Report. On the pop-up, I selected my package that included some sales data. I chose my list template. And then from my package, I dragged order number, order date, product name, quantity, and revenue on. Now, order number, order date, and product name are not measures. However, quantity and revenue are measures in my package. And I can tell that easily by looking at those icons. Now, I dragged them on and ran my report. And COGNOS went out to the database and grabbed some data. And what it did was present to me all of the unique values of my non-measures. It presented order order date, and product. Now that's important because I actually don't know how many order line items there are on this order 1423 for this granite belay product, because a list always deduplicates my non-measures. It always presents me one row for every combination of values for the non-measures I put in my list. I also put some measures in, though. And when I put measures in a list, it'll list my non-measure combinations once, and then it will aggregate my measures across all of the rows in the data. So I don't know how many line items there are on 1423 for this order for granite belay, but I do know that however many number of rows there were, 1, 2, 3, 4, I know that the total quantity for those rows was 8, and the total revenue for those rows was $551.52. Okay? So when you create a list report by default, when you drag non-measures on, COGNOS will present the unique values of those non-measures. So when I dragged on order number here, if I run my report, I would have one row per order. Wouldn't matter how many line items were on that order, I would get exactly one row per order because it deduplicated my order number. When I drag a measure on, like revenue, it's going to aggregate that measure across all of the lines in the database and present it, that aggregated value, next to my non-measure. So if I had order number only on and revenue, order number and revenue, I would get one row per order and I would get the total revenue for that order in my list. Does that make sense? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That feedback helps me a lot. It lets me know you're still on. It also lets me know I can continue. So I appreciate the feedback. Now, if you are a database person, then this slide's for you. It tells you the SQL that COGNOS writes for a list, that it's doing a group by for your non-measures, and it's doing an aggregate for your measures. If you're not a database person, then you don't care about this slide, and that's fine. As long as you understood what I said, you're good to go. If you're a database person and you like to know these details, then slide number 24 gives you some of those details. Now, you might have noticed that I've got some repeating data here, 1423 repeats. And if I were presenting this in a PDF or on my screen, deduplicating this data may be a good format. Right? If I were dumping this into Excel for analysis, right, I wouldn't necessarily mind the repeating data. In fact, I'd probably welcome it. But in other formats, right, I may want to group and deduplicate the repeating values. And this next page, 25, shows you that you can. So in this report, I picked a package of HR information when I created my report. From there, I put the country where my staff works, the city in which my staff works, and the name of the staff. And when I ran the report, it gave me a row that mixed countries, mixed cities, and showed me my staff. It didn't organize my report to make it really easy for me to see who works where. But I then clicked on the country column and I clicked the group button. And that told COGNOS to bring all of the same country data together, present the country name once, and merge the cell. And then I clicked on the city column and clicked group. And that said to make city a group within country. Bring like data together and deduplicate the values, presenting the value once. Having done that, I now can glance at this report, and I can see that Leah works in one city and Barbara works in a different city very, very easily. And I can also see who are Leah's colleagues in Hamburg. So grouping organizes the data in my list. It brings like data together. It deduplicates the repeating values of the columns I grouped. And I can create groups and subgroups and sub-subgroups and so on. Now, if a group spans multiple pages, you don't have to do anything special. The group values will be repeated at the top of each new page as needed. So that's all automatic. Sometimes I would like my outside group value to repeat every time my subgroup value changes. You see on the left-hand side list, Germany is not repeated for each city. On the right-hand list, Germany is repeated for each city. That's because I can tell COGNOS which one I want. I can tell COGNOS when I list to not repeat the value of the outer group for each inner group, or to repeat the value of the outer group for each inner group. That's up to me. The default is not to repeat. It's the left-hand side list is the default. So you would just make a quick change and you would get the right list if that makes sense. So here's a list, had no measures. It's a who works where lists from an HR package. Sometimes grouping is enough, and sometimes not so much. So grouping brings my like data together, and that's good, but it doesn't really control the order of the data within my groups. When I group, I get the added benefit of alphabetizing the groups, so the groups will appear in alphabetical order. But maybe the data within the group should have a specific order as well. So if I need to control the order of a list within groups, if I happen to have groups in my list, I don't have to. I have a sort button on the on-demand toolbar that will allow me to specify various sorting options. As you can see in the slide, if I click on a column, I clicked product line in this slide. Example, I can sort product lines which happen to be grouped. You could probably tell that by looking at the screen. I can sort them ascending, that's alphabetical A to Z, or descending Z to A. And I could do that on any column. I get those options. And then I have this extra option at the bottom that's sort of fun called Edit Layout Sorting. And that is an option that gives me a more advanced sorting capability. Let's suppose I wanted to order my product lines based on total revenue, where the product line that's listed first has nothing to do with the product line name. It has everything to do with the total value of revenue for that product line. And I'd like the product line with the highest value to be listed first. Well, I can't do that with ascending or descending because that's sorting by the name of the product line. I would do that with Edit Layout Sorting. Now we're going to do an example that includes the Edit Layout Sorting thing and actually do pretty much exactly what I just said, only we're going to sort by values of profit. In addition to being able to group and sort my data, sometimes I want to add some headers and footers in my list. And a list actually has many options for optional headers and footers if you wish to enable them. So we'll do an exercise that shows you that we can add headers that show up at the top or the bottom of every page, a header that shows up just on page 1, a footer that just shows up on the last page, and so on. So we can add these headers and footers, if we wish, to our lists at any time, or not at all, FYI. The next slide, which is page 28 of your book, shows a grouped list. This is actually a snippet of a grouped list. And it shows, I'm going to say, the most common type of footer that you would have in a list. This is a who sold what type of list. So this came from my sales package. I created a list report from my sales package. I dragged over the name of the sales rep. I dragged over the product line they sold, and I dragged over the revenue measure, because COGNOS automatically gives me one row for the combination of staff and product, my non-measures, and aggregates my measure, revenue. I know that Alice has sold $7.5 million of camping equipment. Now, I don't know what products those are. I don't know how many orders that might be. All I know is that the total revenue is $7.5 million because of how I wrote the list. That's a fairly summarized list. And that's usually true. The more non-measures I put in my list, the more detailed the data is in the list. The fewer non-measures I put in my list, the more summarized the data, the measures in my list will be. Even though revenue on each row is summarized, COGNOS still refers to those as the detail rows in the group. And that's only because COGNOS needs to have us, in our minds, separate those individual rows of data for each of the columns I put in from the subtotal for Alice Walker that appears at the bottom of the group. So that's referred to as a summary row. And that's the most common footer that you're going to find in any list. When you group a list, you often would like your measures to be subtotal, if you will, for each group, so you can tell the total revenue that Alice has brought in is $19 million, and you haven't got to manually add up the 5 rows. So those 5 rows that are the individual values for each of the columns that I put in and the aggregated measure amount are detail rows. If I choose to add a footer for each group, that would be a summary row or a summary footer. So just some nomenclature for you. That footer is optional, but I have to say most people want it. So with all of that in mind about lists, let's go back and build our list report. So I'm going to stop sharing, which means that the screen that I'm using with Dan's login needs to be reshared. So hopefully the gentleman who's been helping me with this is still there.
Trying to.
Perfect. Just wanted to be sure you were there.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe you'll have to return control to me as well. Perfect.
Should be coming your way.
It is indeed. Thank you. So if you all would please go to your switcher and remove this new report we started. So click on your switcher. Next to new, you'll find on the right-hand side your remove button. Go ahead and remove it. You'll get a pop-up that tells you, hey, you have unsaved work. Do you want to continue anyway? We do. Click OK. And that'll just get us all back to where we can start a new report. Not because we're going to do much that's different. We're going to pick the same package. It's just a matter of, I have found in teaching this class now for the past 12 years that if we don't routinely go back and start new reports from scratch, people forget how to do it. So rather than take that chance, we're going to go ahead and create new reports this way each time, just to give us that extra practice. In your book, the step-by-step instructions that I would normally follow for this exercise begin on page 30. The problem is they required that the samples from IBM be loaded for us to follow them exactly as is. As you know, I've said it already a couple of times, the samples are not loaded, but I don't want to end class early because we have a lot to cover. We're going to go ahead and use your data rather than the sample data and do the same exercises. So we're going to devise the report we're writing on the fly rather than use the exact report that's in our book. So I'm going to need your help from time to time about what data might be appropriate to add to our report to make a meaningful report. So I do hope that you'll participate in that way. Let's go ahead and start a new report by clicking on New and choosing Report. And when the new dialog pops up, please click on the ellipsis at the right-hand side of the blank package box. And in Team Content, navigate to the Packages folder and click once on it. Find the Global Sales package in that list. Again, click once on it, left click on your mouse, and then click the Open button. When you come back here, let's choose the blank template and click OK. Now, the reason I had you pick the blank template is because I wanted you to use this shortcut, and I wanted you to see how this shortcut applies that I showed you earlier. You might have used the list template to get where we're going to go quicker. But again, I want you to see a number of options as we go here. Plus, the book said on page 30, task 1, step 2, to pick that template. So that's why we're going to do it. Go ahead and click on that shortcut button, please. That's the gray plus that's in the center of your canvas. It will give you a list of options surrounding that, one of which will be list. That is the data container we'd like to use. So do go ahead and click on list. My system here is not quite cooperating. There we go. And you should get a pop-up. And that pop-up is going to ask you to name the list and the name of the query behind the list. Now, I have to say that a lot of folks just click OK at this point, and they don't name anything. And I want to advise you that you might want to be in the habit of naming at least your queries, if not your lists and your queries. And the reason for that is not so much that it makes writing your report today any easier, but as you write a lot of reports and you create some very sophisticated reports with many queries and many objects on the page, if all of your queries are query 1, query 2, query 3, query 4, it makes it rather difficult to know which query you need to modify to correct a bug or enhance your report. So even though that today naming them isn't going to help us a lot, you will thank me in future when you're modifying reports that things have all been named. So I'm going to go ahead and name my list. Now, how you name a thing and what you name a thing, boy, that varies from customer to customer to customer. So, you know, we're gonna just for now label this L sales because I prefix everything. That's me. You don't have to adopt my prefix everything standard. You probably should have a Chromolog standard for how you name things. But in my world, if you don't have a standard, the standard I recommend is I prefix everything. So I'm going to call this L sales, and I'm going to call my query Q sales. If you don't want to use the prefix thing, that's fine. Just call it sales and sales. I prefix everything with what it is. That's just my. Maybe it's because I'm I've been programming for 30 years, and I learned how to name things 30 years ago when I started programming. Once you've named it and clicked OK, we should all have an empty list on our page. If you click your data button, that will expose your package. And we can go ahead and create our list. And let's just figure out the list we're going to create. In your book on page 31, that's the list we would have created with our sample data. We're going to create a similar but different list with Chromalox data. I'm going to expand the Report Studio folder, and I'll expand the sales information. And in here, I want to put some measures on my report. So why don't we drag quantity and extended price and margin on our report. Now, I could drag them one at a time, or I could click on quantity, Control key on my keyboard, and then click on extended price, and then margin extended with my Control key down. The Control key lets me select multiple things. And then I could drag those items into my list by clicking on one of them, holding my mouse key down, and dragging inside the empty list and dropping. So I could do them one at a time, or I could multi-select. You pick whichever way makes you happy. Anyone having any trouble getting those three items into their list?
Rich, just a quick point. I did that and I get overall summary totals. Did I do something wrong there? Or?
Nope. It's actually, I was going to ask about that, so thank you for bringing it up. And this is, it's interesting that I didn't and you did, but it all comes down to this notion I told you earlier about report options. So, if you would please, find the More button up in your application bar and click it. And choose Options, the second item in the More list. In the Options pop-up screen, you'll find a tab labeled Report. Please click on the Report tab. In the list of options, you're going to find an option called Automatic Group and Summary Behavior for Lists. And you notice on my screen, it is not checked. But if you got an overall summary when you added these measures, you're going to find that this is checked on your set of options. Am I right?
That's right, yeah.
Right. So this option, which we can each set to our own preference, controls whether I get those automatic footers on my lists and on my groups. You see, I'm set up so that I get no automatic footers. My automatic group and summary behavior for lists is unticked. Okay? And I might do that because more often than not, those automatic footers are things I delete, I don't need. And so automatically adding them every time I add a measure just makes me crazy. Well, if that's the case, I would come here and uncheck this option. Other people would say, I need every one of those footers every time. And why would I have to do the steps to manually create them every time? I'm going to turn on this option so I always get those footers because that's what I always want. Your mileage will vary, guys. You do what makes sense for you. For now, let's all have the same setting. It'll just make things easier, and our screens will end up looking the same. If you look at page 31 in your book, you'll see there's no footers for each group. So clearly this option was turned off when that page was built. I'm going to turn it on. Automatic group and summary behavior for lists turned on. If yours is on, please leave it on. If yours is off, please enable it and click OK. Now, you won't actually see a change in your list until you add something new to it, but my friends, when we add something new, you will get a footer on it automatically. And that footer is going to give me the grand total of these three measures. Now, it's not always going to be the total. If I had unit price on my report, a total for unit price would not be meaningful. An average might be, but certainly not a total. So we'll talk about aggregation in a moment, but let's keep in mind that while total is by far the most common, and I'll call those footers subtotals, that's not technically correct. Technically, right, it's whatever aggregate makes sense for the measure that I want in those footers. So we'll come back to that. For now, I'm going to collapse sales information, and I'm going to expand product hierarchy. And what I'm going to do is I want to add product family and product group to my list. So I'm going to just so that we have the practice doing it, I'm going to do them one at a time because I want to go back to how do I add a column to my list once I've got the first column in it. You see, putting the first column in a list was rather easy. The list was a nice big object. I could throw my cursor anywhere in the list and things showed up in the proper place. But once I start working on the list after the first drag and drop, it's a little bit tricky. So for a second, just watch me. I'm going to drag product family over to my list. Now, if I put product family here, if I drop my list here, you see with that one black flashy bar, I'm actually telling COGNOS not to put this column in the list. If I drop it there, I'm going to get a pop-up. That pop-up is going to say, I created a new singleton and a new query for this. See, because I didn't hit the list. I wasn't where I should be to add it to the list. And so that pop-up, if you ever get that pop-up, that's a mistake, right? If you meant to put it in the list and you didn't, you'll get this pop-up. Just click OK and click undo and try again. That's the worst that'll happen. Nothing earth-shattering goes wrong. It's just that it didn't show up in the list. But it is vexing because I didn't get it where I wanted. Similarly, if I go too far to the right and I get a single black bar and drop it, I'll get that same singleton problem. So what I have learned is that this comes up a lot when people are learning to write their reports. So I have found a very simple, I think, technique for never missing my list. And that's by putting my cursor just inside the title of a column that I want my new column next to. So you see how I've got my cursor right now just inside the margin column, and it's on the left, right of center of that column. It's right of center. And you see the three bars with the middle one flashing? That tells me that this new column will show up on the right of the margin. It's not where I want it, but now I can see where it'll show up. If I scooch my mouse a little to the left of center inside that margin column, you see how the flashing bar moves to the left. So if I were to drop this column, it would show up between extended price and margin. If you leverage the existing columns with your mouse, when you're building your list, you'll find that you don't get that pop-up and singleton error by missing the list very often. Now, I would actually like this new column to be the first column in the list, to the left of quantity. So I'm putting my cursor inside the quantity column, just left of center. And when I lift, it'll drop my product family in, and you notice, you see, I now have that automatic footer that the option I enabled gave me. And then I'm going to drag product family description next, and then my group and my group description. And I'm going to control click on those two guys and drag them in and place them where I want them. So I'm going to give you a second to get caught up and get where I am as far as your list layout. Everybody good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's switch to preview mode and take a look at our report. So click on the page views eyeball and choose page preview. This will run our report, present the first page of results on our screen, and it'll give us a chance to take a look at what we have. So I made the rash assumption by reading the product hierarchy query subject and the order that things are listed, that families are made up of groups. But based on this data, it appears to me that maybe groups are made up of families. Is that right? Or am I misinterpreting the data? Does anybody know?
Not sure really what product family and product group are, to be honest.
Okay. Well, we'll experiment. We'll learn the data as we go. That is part of working with a new package. Now, can you guys tell me if you guys typically like to see codes along with their translations in your reports, or are the codes not typically presented in a report? You see how we have family code and family name?
I don't think you need the codes myself.
Okay. So if you have a column in a report and you'd like to remove that column, there's lots of ways to remove the column. You'll pick one you like. I'm going to pick, I'll click on the product group heading. There's no delete button in the toolbar, strangely enough. It's actually hidden under the very last button in the toolbar, which is the More button. If you click on that, you'll find delete there. I find that inefficient. If I have to click twice, I'm not sure that's the best way to go. I find just clicking the delete key on my keyboard is the most sensible to me. If you'd prefer to click More and then click delete, knock yourself out. If you'd prefer to click the delete key on your keyboard, perfectly fine. I will also delete product family from my list. Now, guys, I have a suspicion that product groups make up product families, not the other way around. So I want to move my product group to the left. You might be tempted to simply click, then drag, all in one step in COGNOS. And what I'll tell you is that sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. The best practice that always works, guys, is to click on the item you want to move, then click and drag that item. That always works. So I like doing things that always work and not sometimes work. So I try to find the always solution. The always solution is click, then click and drag. Sometimes click and drag will work. Always click, then click and drag will work. So I believe that that's actually the proper order to present. And you really do want to remember that people in the Western world anyway read things from left to right, and so you want to have a sensible order to your columns from left to right, therefore, so that folks are reading something in a natural way. Of course, if you are in some countries, of course, right to left is the standard there. So again, it depends on where you are. We're going to go with a left to right orientation for this class. Now, you'll notice that the product group data repeats for multiple families. And let's suppose that we would prefer not to have it repeat. Well, that's what grouping your list is for. So we're going to select the product group description column, and we're going to use the button bar. And we're going to click the group button. Now, we haven't really explored the button bar yet. So the first thing I'll tell you about your button bar is if you hover your mouse over a button, it tells you the name of the button, which might be enough to give you all the info you need about what the button does. That's the first thing I'll tell you. The second thing I'll tell you is your group button, which is also your ungroup button. So once you've grouped, you can ungroup, is the fifth button in. So please hover over the buttons till you find the group button and click it once. And that will cause a number of things to take place. Number one, your product group data will be deduplicated and the cell will be merged for each value. Do you see how it's deduplicated? Number one. Number two, because of that automatic option we enable, we're going to get a footer for that group that shows the aggregated values of quantity, extended price, and margin. Did everybody get that result?
Yep.
Yeah? All right. So, would I click group on product family description? Would that make sense to do in this report? Any thoughts on that?
No.
No, it's okay.
No, because, band nozzle mica shows me 415,000 in quantity. Do I need a footer under band nozzle mica that also shows me 415,000 quantity? No, right? That would be redundant. It's almost always true that there's at least one non-measure that is not grouped in your report. If you find yourself grouping every non-measure, you're probably over-grouping your report. That's just one of those rules of thumb that come up. Let's go ahead and from our package, let's close up product hierarchy and let's open up customer information and let's add country name, ship to country name to our data. Now, if we're going to do ship to country in our report, where would it make sense to put it? And how would we group our data? Would we group it by country and then by product information? Would it make sense to group it by product information and then break it down by country? And is there a wrong answer to that question? See, I could see where I might put country as my first column and make that my first group, which, by the way, means I'd have to undo my product group description because I want to change the order of my groups. But then I would first organize my data by country and then by product information. But I could also see wanting to see my product family data broken down by country. Either one is right. It depends on the analysis I'm trying to support with this list. I'm going to grab ship to country name and make it the third column in my list. And what that should do is it should break down each product family description by country, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Now you see I have a lot of repeating data in product family, don't I? I could group product family, which will help me deduplicate my data and organize my list. So I'll click on my product family description, and I will click on the group button. And then you'll notice the page down button on the bottom of your work area. It's on the bottom left. Go ahead and click page down. And what you should see is at the end of the list of ship to countries, you will have a summary for the product family data. And if you were to continue to page down, you would see that you get a summary for each different product family value. And if you kept going, you would see a summary for the product group. And if you go all the way to the bottom, you will see an overall summary. Okay? So with that automatic group and summary behavior for lists option enabled, I'm getting these footers of overall footer for the list and a group footer for each of the groups in my report. Now, there's one last thing I want to do with you today before we end the class for today, and we pick up again on Wednesday morning for me. I believe it's Wednesday afternoon for most of you all. And that is this. The report we're running right now is presenting all of the data in the database. It's not focused in any way. Certainly, it's broken down by product group, product family, and country, but it is for every order, regardless of order date. It is summarizing every row in the database, which is not normal. It is not typical to write a report that just summarizes every row in the database. It's normally very common to focus my report on a subset of the data. Maybe that's just the data entered in the last week. Maybe it's the data month to date. Maybe it's data for only a particular product or a collection of products. Maybe it's for just a few countries, not every country. But it's almost always true, I would say this is the 99.9% rule, that you need to focus your report on a smaller subset of data than all data. And while we don't teach filters yet in the class, we don't teach it for a couple more chapters, I think because it's an important concept, we'll do a quick filter right now before we save this report and call it a day. Please click on your ship to country name. In the toolbar that comes up, you'll find the first button is a funnel, which is the filter button. I wish you would click on that, please. And in the list, you're going to find an entry called Create Custom Filter. Please click it. What I'd like to do is only include data for a select number of countries here. Now, you'll notice that the list of countries is presented. It's not a full list because it's only presenting page 1. Left-hand side, you see you've got page up and page down arrows. But you can also search. So what I thought we would do is we would include France. So I'm going to type France and click search. And then I'll double-click on France. Now, I don't know how you all have your data entered. I'm going to type United and see if the United Kingdom comes up. Perfect. And I'll choose United Kingdom. And then just for fun, we'll do a couple more. I'm going to do Luxembourg. So I'll type in LUX. Notice I'm typing a lowercase LUX, but it's finding the uppercase L in Luxembourg. And let me do Belgium as well. If you wanted to add Germany, you knock yourself out. You add Germany. But after you've got a selection of some countries that make sense for the analysis we're doing, I'm going to click OK. Right, and I've obviously now focused this report on some data about my activities in Europe. And because this is my ship to, this is really about customers receiving my product in Europe, not necessarily where the sale happened. Okay? So since it's so very common to filter and so very uncommon not to, I wanted to add a filter here just to drive that point home. Did that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now you'll notice that cartridge does not include Luxembourg, and that's because I apparently have never sold cartridges in Luxembourg, at least not for the data that I'm pointing to, or shipped it there. Pardon me. I've never shipped cartridge data to Luxembourg. Now that may be on purpose. There may be actual reasons, right? Good reasons why we didn't or can't. Or it may turn out that there's an opportunity here. Gee, I wonder why we're not selling that product family in Luxembourg. But interpreting the data is a vastly different conversation than writing a report. Let's go ahead and save this report, and then we will finish up our activities for the day. In the application bar on the left-hand side, you'll find your Save button. Please click it. In the pop-up, please click on the My Content on the left-hand side, because we're going to save all of these reports privately. Each of you is going to have your own copy. So in your My Content, please name this. The book would tell us to call it BR Lists Report Demo 1. You can abbreviate that if you wish. The BR is just to differentiate this report from the Advanced Reporting Module, AR. That's all. It means nothing more than basic reporting and advanced reporting. Nothing big there. Click Save after you've named it. Your report is now saved, and we'll pick up by editing this report on Wednesday morning and continuing to do some of the things that are unique to working with lists. Until then, thank you very much for your participation today. If you don't want to continue to try things in COGNOS, you can just close your browser at this point. And on Wednesday morning, we'll pick up round about page 31 in your book, and we'll edit this report and sort it and add some headers and footers. So until then, have a terrific week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks.
You're welcome.